My job is watching a woman trapped in a room. Part 1. 3 years ago, I was looking at the local job classifieds online when one of the ads caught my eye. Not because of what it said, but because it said so little. Best I remember, the ad just read, "Job available, good pay, no benefits, discretion required." It then listed an email address, and that was all. At the time, I was managing a music store, but I had already started hearing rumors we would be shutting down within the next year, and the likelihood of a transfer to another store was slim. I had been morosely looking at job listings for the last few days, but this was the first one that stood out, if only because I was bored and it was weird, so I sent an email. Half an hour later, I had a response, telling me to go to a particular office building in an upscale part of the city at a precise time for my screening. I went, and after waiting for a few minutes in the lobby, I was taken into an office where I was given a series of forms and questionnaires to fill out. They collected them and told me they would be in touch. I had almost forgotten about the whole thing, until a month later I got a call saying I had moved on to the second stage of the hiring process. I was again given an address and time, and when I arrived, this time it was a different nice office park 20 miles away from the first one. I was met by a man who introduced himself as Mr. Solomon. He escorted me into a large room that contained a chair and a desk. On the desk were 2 large monitors, a keyboard and mouse, and a bolted-down metal box with 2 oversized buttons on it, one red and one green. He told me this room was a model for the place I would be working if I took the job. He described the job as follows. I would be working 7 shifts of 6 hours every week. My job would be simple. I would arrive at work 10 minutes early and enter an outer area that was like a locker room. I would have my own personal locker. I would store all belongings in the locker and change into the provided work clothes. I was never, under any circumstances, to carry any item of my own into the surveillance room. I was never, under any circumstances, to take any item with me from the surveillance room. As for what I was to do in the surveillance room, I was told that the monitor on the left would constantly show a live stream from a high-definition camera in a remote location. My job was simply to watch the camera. Once an hour, I would get onto the computer attached to the right monitor and enter a brief log describing anything interesting that occurred in the last hour. I would have no pens or pencils or paper, and I should never try to take any kind of written notes about the work. As for the red and green buttons, the red button was only to be used if there was an emergency. This meant something on the video or in my workspace that required outside help. The green button was to be hit if I saw something on the video feed that was particularly noteworthy. It would tell other people somewhere that, at least in my opinion, something interesting was going on. Solomon stressed that while I was given discretion on when to use this button, I should err on the side of only using it if and when something of real significance occurred. He pointed out the camera on the ceiling of the room we were in. He said the real room would be the same. My work would be observed, and other people were watching the room on the video feed as well. He said I was only a redundancy in case other systems failed. He then smirked and asked if I knew what he meant by redundancy. I nodded, trying not to show my irritation. I don't talk that good to people, so sometimes they think I'm dumb. That's okay. Let him think that if he paid me good enough. The pay was very good, $35 an hour. This worried me. I was already thinking this was some kind of psych experiment or secret government job, which I was okay with. But that kind of money to sit and watch a screen. My mom always told me that if something seems too good to be true, it probably is. And this was seeming too good to be true. I asked if I was going to be doing anything illegal. Solomon laughed and said no. I asked if anyone was going to get hurt. Again, he shook his head no. He said the reason they were paying so much was because they needed employees that were motivated to be professional and discreet. The work they were doing was important, and for various reasons it couldn't be discussed. If I took the job, I would have to sign papers promising I would never discuss my work there or I could be sued or locked up. I'm only breaking that now because of everything that's happened. So I took the job, and because they wanted me to start right away, I had to quit the store with no notice. I felt bad about that, but I was excited about the new job too. It was a lot of money and seemed like easy enough work, if a bit boring. I was nervous that there was something more to it, but I told myself I would just have to see. No point in chickening out and wasting a good chance because I let my imagination go crazy. I was given the location of the job itself, and when I went there, I was amazed that it really was just like the model room I had been shown with, only a few differences. There was a locker room you had to pass through to enter the surveillance room, and there was a small bathroom attached to the real surveillance room also. The real room had a small water cooler in the corner, but because I wasn't allowed to bring anything in with me, I had to eat before or after every shift. The biggest difference, of course, was that the monitors were turned on. The right monitor was just a black and white terminal like you see in movies sometimes. I could type in my logs, but no internet to look at or anything like that. The left monitor, it was video from a room. You would call it a bedroom, I guess, because it had a bed in it. But it had lots of other stuff too. A TV, a sofa and chairs, a couple of tables, and plenty of empty space in between. The camera must be high up in a corner, because I could see pretty much everything except for the far sides of furniture. At first, though, I didn't notice any of that stuff. All I saw was her. She looked to be a little older than me and was very pretty. When I first saw her, she was laying on her side on the sofa. That was the part of the room farthest from the camera, but the picture was very clear, and I could tell that she was sleeping. I found myself leaning into the monitor more so I could see her better, and then I thought about what I was doing and felt embarrassed. It's like I was spying on her. A peeping Tom, my mom used to call it. I didn't want to be a peeping Tom, but I didn't want to be silly either. I needed to think about it slow. It was a good job, and I wasn't doing anything wrong, right? I wasn't hurting anybody. The woman looked fine, and the room was nice. She probably agreed to be there, and it's all some experiment or something. I was just overreacting. So I sat down in the chair and began my work. It didn't take long before I understood more. The woman, I took to calling her Rachel, wasn't there of her free will. I never saw her hurt, but it was clear that she never left that room except to go into what I think is a bathroom area that my camera couldn't see. Well, she never left the room on her own. Periodically, usually a couple of times a week during my shifts, men and women in strange-looking outfits would come in and take her from the room. Sometimes she would struggle, but usually she would just go along with her head hung low. They would always bring her back, though the times when she wasn't brought back during my shift were always the worst for me. I would worry about her until I got to work the next day and saw her in the room watching TV or painting. She never looked hurt or even that upset except for when they took her, and even when she fought, they were always gentle with her. Still, I knew something was wrong. I considered quitting the job, or hitting the red button and getting someone to come so I could get some answers, or calling the police and showing them what the camera was showing me. Except I was scared of losing my job, and scared of what these people might do to me if I quit or told on them. Solomon had told me when I took the job that part of being discreet was not asking questions. I would never be asked to do more than I had already been told, but I could never tell anyone what I did or saw, and I could never ask questions about what I was doing or why. So I made excuses. It was all an experiment. She was crazy or sick, and they were trying to help her. She was doing a job just like I was, or if she really was a prisoner somewhere, at least I was watching to make sure that she was okay. If they ever tried to hurt her, or I saw that she really didn't want to be there for sure, I could get help then. In a way, I told myself, I was helping to protect her by watching. I don't expect you to think much of my excuses. I don't think much of them myself, especially now. But in my defense, when things changed, I didn't ignore it or try to explain it away. I knew something had to be done. Rachel would usually paint for an hour or two every day, and it seemed to always be during my afternoon shifts. The room had no windows as far as I could tell, but I guess she either used a clock or her own body's time to keep to a kind of schedule. I always liked to watch her paint. The thing she was painting was always facing the wrong way for me to see it, but I could see her face as she worked. She always looked peaceful and happy when she was painting, and seeing her that way, smiling serenely from time to time as she got something the way she wanted it, always made my day. I first noticed something was wrong when she started painting more frequently a few weeks ago. Her expression was more focused and serious, and there was a tension to her movements that I wasn't used to seeing. At first I thought she was just really trying to work hard on something, and I wanted to tell her not to worry. Every few weeks the others would come in and take the old paintings out anyway, bringing in a new stack of, I think the word is canvas. But it was more than her being focused. Something was wrong. She didn't look happy, and she was going for hours at a time. In the span of 3 days, she had finished 4 paintings. I had been growing more and more worried watching her work, and when she finished the 4th, I found myself telling her to just stop and rest a while. I had grown accustomed to talking to the monitor, talking to her in my own way. But she didn't stop. Instead, she began moving the paintings, arranging them on the back and seat of the long sofa at the far end of the room. This was the first time I had gotten to see any of the paintings. Even when the others were taking them out, they always seemed to be turned away from the camera. I was still worried about her, but I was also happy to finally see something she had worked on. Happy and amazed. They were beautiful. One was a beautiful green forest. Another was an old stone well. A third was a house sitting alone on a small island. The last was an old-fashioned looking movie theater. All of them looked like something out of a dream, with trailing lines of color mixing in the air around them, like leaves caught in a wind. It was only when I looked close that I realized the lines of color weren't random. They were words. Easy to miss if you weren't looking close, and by themselves they didn't seem to mean much. Just the ghost of a word somewhere in each of the paintings. Easy to lose in everything else that was being shown. I leaned into the monitor and squinted, trying to read the words. Then my heart started thudding as I made them out. Blinking and rubbing my eyes, I looked again, reading them out loud in order, left to right, top pair, then bottom. Please. Help. Me. Thomas. I pushed back from the monitor, my hand over my mouth. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how any of this could be happening. It wasn't just that she was asking for help, though that was a big part of it. It was that my name is Thomas. I thought about the camera above me and took my hand away from my face. I rolled back to the desk and sat there, trying to stop from shaking, trying to make myself take a breath. Think about it slow. The first thing was, should I hit a button? The red button was for an emergency. If she was a prisoner or something, and she was trying to escape, they might think that was an emergency. But no one had been hurt that I knew of. And I think Mr. Solomon meant save that for something that was like a police or ambulance emergency, not something like this. But what about the green button? This was definitely something noteworthy. Not only that she was asking for help, but that she was asking me for help. I made myself stop for a moment. I couldn't know for sure she was asking me. I had gone to school with several boys named Thomas. It was a common name. But the chances of her painting that name when I was working here? I didn't want to be silly, but I wasn't trying to be too... What's that word? Mom used to say it when she read her angel books. Skeptics. I didn't want to be a skeptic either. I had to believe it was probably meant for me. And that was something they would want to know. But should I hit the green button? My hands were drifting toward the metal box on the desk, but I hesitated. I didn't like breaking rules, and I was scared of what would happen if I broke these. If they really were holding her prisoner, then they were probably very bad people. But I didn't know that. Maybe they were good, and she was bad. But I looked back at the monitor for the first time since reading the words. Rachel was already moving the paintings back off the sofa, as though she knew the message had been received. A canvas in each hand, she glanced up at the camera as she moved across the room, and it felt like she was looking right at me. My chest tightened as my hands moved away from the buttons. No, I didn't think she was bad. I had watched her for years. I felt like I knew her, would know if she was bad. Strange as it seemed, in a way she was my friend, and I was going to try and help her. I spent the rest of my shift trying to act normal and think of what to do. I knew whoever else was watching might have noticed the paintings or seen how I acted, but I couldn't worry about that. I would try to play it cool and try to think how I could help her. The only people I had actually met, connected to this job, were a couple of people when I filled out the papers, and then Mr. Solomon, when he showed me the model room and told me the job. I had no way of contacting any of them except through the buttons. My checks were deposited electronically, and I had never run into anyone else who worked at the surveillance room. That thought made me stop a second. I had always thought it was weird that I never ran into someone when I was coming or going, the person I was taking over for, or the person who was taking over for me. I had always figured there must be other people, other surveillance rooms even, and they just scheduled us so we didn't run into each other, and I still thought there were others. Part of why I thought that was because it seemed like I wasn't the only person who used my surveillance room. The water cooler, the toilet paper, the soap, they all seemed to go down faster than I think I was using it by myself. If that was true, maybe I could figure out who they were, and maybe they would be safer to talk to than whoever it was that I worked for. I got off work at 8 that night, and instead of grabbing some food and going home, I drove my car around the block and then parked down the street from the building where I worked. Nothing had changed while I drove around for a minute. No new cars had parked or anything, and if I was right, they didn't send anyone to replace me until they were sure I was gone anyhow. So I sat and waited. I was tired, and the street was pretty empty and boring, but I was too excited and scared to fall asleep. Every time a car passed or someone walked down the sidewalk, I tensed. I kept imagining a SUV or van pulling up behind me, men getting out and pulling me from my car, taking me somewhere like where they had Rachel to kill or torture me. Half a dozen times I almost cranked up and drove away. But every time I would think of her alone in that room, she had no one but me to help her, and I had to try. 2 hours later, a fat, balding man parked and started heading for the building. As soon as I saw he was able to unlock the door and enter, I opened my car door to go talk to him. Then I stopped. I needed to be smart. I didn't know where they were, but I was sure there were hidden cameras in the locker room and outside the building. If I go running in there and confront that guy, they'll know for sure that I'm up to something. Sighing with frustration, I shut the door back and waited until his shift was over. I considered tailing him like in the movies, but I was scared I would just lose him, or he would call someone for help. So I waited until he was walking back to his car after a 6-hour shift, hopefully far enough away that the cameras wouldn't see. And then I met the man I came to know as Charles Jeffries. Hey man, can I talk to you for a minute? His back was to me and he just waved his hand absently without looking up. Sorry, I don't have any money. Have a good... He froze as he glanced back at me while talking. Oh God. Number, you need to get out of here, kid. We aren't allowed to talk. I could tell he was scared, But I couldn't risk letting him go yet, not after all this. I stepped up and pushed the door back shut as he was trying to get into his car. "So you know who I am?" I tried to not sound mean, but I could hear how mad I was in my voice. He yanked at the door again, but I was still holding it, and I was stronger than he was. After a second, weaker tug, he turned around, his face strained and tired looking. "Yeah, I know who you are. You work here just like me. And I'm telling you, we aren't supposed to be talking. We aren't supposed to meet ever." I frowned. Mr. Solomon never told me that. He never said it was one of the rules. The man shook his head. "Mr. Solomon. Yeah. Well, there are plenty of rules they don't tell you. I bet they didn't tell you what you were going to be watching before you started, did they?" When I just lowered my eyes, he went on. "Yeah, me either. I've been at this job for 10 years. I've seen other people come and go, usually because they broke those rules they never mentioned. The only reason I'm still here is because I keep my head down and my mouth shut." He wagged a finger at me. "You should do the same, if it's not already too late." I felt my stomach curling into a cold knot. Too late? The man rubbed his face. "Kid, do you think they don't know we're talking? Do you think anything happens that they don't know about?" He looked back toward the building, a look of sadness and fear in his eyes. "Hell, for all I know, you've already killed us both." Shaking his head, he pushed me back and started opening the door. "Either way, I'm done risking it. You need to stop asking questions and just do your job. It's a lot healthier." With that, he got into his car and shut the door. I didn't try to stop him this time. Even though I had already been worried about what he was telling me, hearing it confirmed was paralyzing. What exactly was my plan? He probably didn't know any more than I did. And even if he did, what could I do with anything he told me? I walked back to my car with a heavy heart. I was still afraid, but more than that, I was sad and ashamed. I wanted to help Rachel, but I wasn't sure how. I wasn't giving up, but as I drove back to my apartment, I couldn't think of what I should do next. This wasn't a movie. I wasn't a hero. And the only ideas I had left were to either go to the police, who might be controlled by whoever I worked for, or try to get proof of her being held prisoner myself. As I parked my car and walked into my apartment building, I made a decision. Unless I thought of something better overnight, I would do both ideas. Tomorrow I would break the rule about carrying anything in. I'd use my phone to record a video of the surveillance room, of Rachel and how she was trapped somewhere, and of me telling everything else I knew. And I would email it to every newspaper, website, and internet channel I could think of. I'd then go to the police and give them a copy too if I could make it that long without getting caught. Maybe if I did all that, even if they got me, someone would help Rachel. I was filled with worry and dread at the idea of being hurt or killed. A part of me kept saying I should just do as I was told and hope that it all went away. But I couldn't live with myself if I did that. Even if I messed up, I felt like I had to try. I was so preoccupied that I didn't hear the person coming up behind me as I unlocked my apartment door. "Thomas?" I turned around and felt my legs weaken as I stumbled back against my door. I had to be dreaming or crazy. I grabbed the doorknob for support as I looked at the woman in front of me. It couldn't be her, but somehow it was. "Rachel?" She hesitated a moment before breaking into a smile. "Is that what you call me? I like it. My name is actually Melanie, though." I felt my face reddening. Of course, her name wasn't actually Rachel. That was just something I made up in my head. Still, my embarrassment couldn't keep up with my confusion and joy. "Is it really you?" She nodded. "Yeah, it's me." "Rachel," Melanie grunted as I stepped forward and started hugging her. Laughing, she hugged me back for a moment, but then she whispered in my ear, "Thomas, we need to talk. And not out here. Can we go inside?" I broke away and nodded, wiping at my eyes as I tried to finish unlocking the door with a shaking hand. My heart was pounding, and I still felt like I was in a strange and wonderful dream. But when we had gotten inside and sat down on my living room sofa, I forced myself to focus on the biggest question I had. How? Melanie had still been smiling as we sat down, but now she looked worried and sad. Thomas, that's what I'm here to tell you. Things aren't like you think they are. They never have been. I frowned, a new line of fear cutting through my happy haze. What do you mean? She held the bridge of her nose for a moment, looking down like she was trying to figure out how to say whatever it was she had to say. Thomas, you're part of a psychological experiment. I've been a part of it for longer than you have as one of the actors, and I still don't know all the details. I'm pretty sure it's run by some government agency, and I know they're investing a lot of money and time into it. But for what reasons? That I'm not so sure. I realized I was wringing my hands. No, that wasn't right. It couldn't be right. This was some kind of trick. Melanie went on. What I do know is that you're being watched as a long-term subject. They have constructed this whole scenario where you do a secret job watching someone. Me, who looks like they might be trapped. They give you instructions and a way of making choices. You've got buttons or something you can choose between, right? I nodded weakly, my tongue thick in my throat. Yeah, a red one and a green one. She sighed and nodded. I think they're testing how much you'll obey, what choices you'll make based off of your morals, your intelligence, and your fear. It's interesting, or at least I thought so when I first joined up 6 years ago. They've never officially given me many details, just the overall gist. But people talk. The other actors and me. Sometimes we hear things and we gossip. She smiled sadly. That's what caused me to start feeling bad. I interrupted. Other actors? Melanie's eyes widened. Oh shit, yeah, sorry. I think they still call him Mr. Solomon? And there are others too. When I just stared at her, she went on. Anyway, for a long time it was just the normal job, right? I spend 6 hours a day acting like I'm this trapped girl, mainly faking painting or watching TV. You know, boring stuff. I couldn't help but interrupt again, hating the hurt trembling in my voice. You fake the painting? You aren't really painting those wonderful pictures? Now Melanie looked embarrassed. No, sorry, I can't paint a bit. I'm a pretty good singer, though. She tried to smile, but faltered. Reaching forward, she touched my arm. That's why they always have the paintings turned where you can't see them. They're already done beforehand. All you ever see is some blank canvases and, well, when they want me to show you something. Her expression darkened as she went on. That's why I had to break the rules and contact you. When they started doing this hidden message, mind game bullshit, I got worried. Worried you would take it too serious, that you could get hurt or even hurt yourself. As soon as you left your shift tonight, I talked to one of the guys in the video department. He told me about how you had reacted. Showed me how you were still parked down the street from the building. I drove over. The bedroom set is in a building outside of town. I saw you sitting in your car and I almost approached you then, but I was scared of getting caught and fired. So I parked and waited until I could follow you somewhere else and let you know I was okay. She blinked back tears. I'm ashamed to say I almost left a couple of times. I don't want to lose this job, and I tried to tell myself you would be okay after a day or two. I could get them to change the script enough that you felt like I was okay and wouldn't worry too much. I felt an angry heat growing in my chest. Well, that's nice of you. She looked up, her eyes red. I know. I'm a shit. I'm so sorry. I was being selfish and cowardly, but I didn't actually leave. And then when I saw Charlie leaving the building, saw you running over to talk to him, I knew they were escalating it even further. Charlie? Melanie rolled her eyes in frustration. Shit. Yeah, sorry. Charlie Jeffries. He's another actor. In an earlier version of the experiment, he actually played Mr. Solomon, but they decided he wasn't scary enough, so now he's usually in one of the suits. He's actually done that for your version a lot. You just can't recognize him under all that getup they wear. I kept curling and uncurling my hands on my lap. It was all too much. I felt like a pinball going between anger and relief, and embarrassment and confusion. So all that stuff he told me, that was all just to scare me? See how I'd react? She nodded as she sniffled and wiped her nose with the back of her hand. Yes, I'm sorry. That's why I knew I couldn't wait any longer to tell you. I could see how worried and scared you were going back to your car. I pulled my arm back from her touch. Well, thanks, I guess. At least you stopped me before I went to the police and looked like a joke in front of them, too. I just wanted her gone, her sympathetic, pitying eyes off of me. Thanks for stopping by and letting me in on it. I tried to make my voice sound hard and unfeeling, but it came out watery instead. Standing up, I turned away from her so she couldn't see as I started to cry. If you don't mind, I need time to think about everything. It's a lot. A moment passed, and then her hand was on my shoulder. Thomas, you don't have anything to be embarrassed about. They are very good at what they do. All you did was what you thought was right. Because you're a good man. I shrugged. I thought that you were in trouble and I wanted to help. She gently turned me toward her, and when I looked up, she smiled and sniffed again. I know, but you need to realize most people wouldn't have tried to help. Not when it meant giving up their job or risking themselves like that. Not for a stranger. I wiped at my face as I looked away. Well, I still feel dumb, but I'm glad it's not real. I'm glad you're okay. That we both are. I paused and caught her eye again. We are, aren't we? Safe, I mean. She hesitated before nodding. Yeah, I think so. Like I said, they have a lot invested in whatever this is, and the fact that they're willing to go as far as they have with you makes me wonder. But I've never seen any signs of anyone getting hurt. I think the worst that could happen is one or both of us gets fired. I felt my face getting red again. Oh, don't worry about that. I'm going to quit tomorrow. I'll finally get to hit their damn buttons. Maybe both of them. I started to smile, but then I saw the look on Melanie's face. Thomas, please don't do that. I don't think they would hurt us, but if you up and quit, they'll figure out I've talked to you. I don't think they watch us all the time, but I don't know what they can find out. You know, tracking cell phones, spy satellites, whatever. I'm taking a big risk just being here, and I don't want them catching on. I took a step back from her. So you want to keep getting paid to trick people like me? She reached out and grabbed my right hand. I had been clenching it unconsciously, and it relaxed at her touch. No, I don't want to. But I wasn't expecting this. How the experiment has changed, getting to actually meet you. I can't do it long term, but another month or two to save up money. Now that you're in on it and won't be scared or hurt by it anymore. She smiled. That I can do. That we can both do. We can keep going like normal, take some more of their money, and then one of us can quit. The next month, the other one can. How does that sound? I shrugged uncertainly. It made some sense, and once I had calmed down, it would probably make more. She gave my hand a squeeze. And when this is all over, I want to get to know you better. I know I've been playing a role, but for the most part, that's been me you've been watching all this time. I think it's only fair I get to see more of you too. She blushed. Assuming you're interested in that. I felt my hand growing clammy in hers as my stomach fluttered. Well, I mean, yeah, I would really like that. Swallowing, I added, how long do we have to wait to see each other again? Melanie grinned at me. Work another month or so. Save what you can, and then quit. I'll wait another 2 or 3 weeks, and then I'll do the same. And then, she looked up at the ceiling as she pondered it for a moment, and I was struck again by how beautiful she was, even if she was a little different in person than I had imagined. 3 months from tonight, we'll meet right here. I'll come over and we can start getting to know each other better. How's that sound? Returning her smile, I nodded. That sounds great. When she left a couple of minutes later, part of me hated to see her go, but another part was relieved. I was so exhausted, and while I was so happy she was okay and we had finally met, I felt like the burned-up wire in an old light bulb. I needed time alone, time to think and calm down, and most of all, time to rest. I didn't really even remember falling asleep, and when I woke up, I realized my alarm had been buzzing for over 30 minutes. I jumped up and raced to get to my shift at work. As she had been leaving, Melanie had stressed again how we needed to act completely the same. That meant not freaking out, but it also meant not acting like everything was okay either. If I suddenly showed no signs of being worried about her, that would tip them off too. I promised, and she left after a brief hug and kiss. Remembering that now, through the haze of my tiredness the night before, it felt like a dream. Still, I went into the surveillance room with a much lighter heart. I didn't have to worry or feel guilty anymore about not helping her, and there was some satisfaction in finally pulling one over on the people that had tricked me for so long. Besides, in 3 months I would be done with this place and get to see Melanie again. In person, at least, because I got to watch her on the video feed as soon as I came into work. She was asleep when I first got there, and I found myself wondering if she was as tired as I still felt. When she woke up later and started reading a book, I found myself beginning to smile and had to stop myself. I should still be worried acting, not smiling like I had a crush. I had to do better so Melanie didn't get in trouble. An hour or so later, she started working on another of her paintings. Watching her work, I was amazed at how real it all looked. It was hard to see everything from my angle, but I would have sworn she had paint on those brushes and was really painting whatever was on the canvas. I found myself feeling proud of her. She really was a great actress. Not only didn't I see her giving any clues that we had met or talked, but she really did seem different in the room than she had in my apartment. I suppose that was what she had meant by playing a role. I was almost at the end of my shift, and while I hated to leave her, I had to admit that I was ready for some more sleep. Trying to guard my reactions all day had been exhausting, and I was dreading the next few weeks. But then I realized she was done painting. I expected her to just go and do something else. But instead she picked up the canvas at its edges and carefully walked it over to the sofa. Her body was blocking it at first, but then she stepped aside. It was a painting of a massive tree. The bark was a dark red, with a huge twisting trunk that broke off into a dozen branches. Those branches were covered in leaves that were so deep green they almost reminded me of storm clouds more than the top of a tree. Like all the paintings, I felt touched by it, even now that Melanie had told me she didn't paint them. The images themselves, combined with the colors and the small details, they really were amazing. Just like this one. If you looked close enough, you could see that there were several small blackbirds in the branches of the tree. It was funny, but it almost looked like they were made out of words. I felt my heart start to hammer, and I forced myself to stay calm. No point in being silly. I knew it was all a game now, and I just had to play my part a little while longer. Still, the worried me would want to know what the words said, so I might as well try to read them. I squinted, following the birds right to left and top to bottom. That girl isn't me. I looked away from the painting to see Rachel staring up at me. She looked terrified. Oh no. I chose to descend. It was finally time. Ever since the cave was discovered in the mountain next to my hometown, I had always wanted to explore it. It was my right after all. I was the one who found it in the woods as a child. But everyone always told me I was too young to try. So I did the obvious thing and waited it out. I waited 12 years, watching the cave become a point of attraction for scientists and explorers, dreaming about being one of them someday. Literally. Barely any nights passed without me descending into those depths in my dreams, camping in the darkness and discovering new tunnels, and sometimes even stumbling upon unknown cave monsters and trying to run away from them, failing, and yelling out in agonizing futility as I got ripped to shreds. That did not deter me, however. On the contrary, every single dream I had inflated my thirst for it. I swear I could actually hear it calling out to me, a call to descend, begging me to see it in all its glory and mystery. And now, after my 12th year of waiting, I stood in front of the cave mouth. I had prepared everything I could, my skills polished to their utmost extent through exploring smaller, safer, more well-explored caves, and my equipment having been checked and tested tenfold. The cave was one of the more mysterious ones in the world, its true depth yet to be known, despite the vast number of explorers having tried. It was almost as if it had been saving its biggest mysteries for me, as if it knew it belonged to me. I could still hear its call, now louder than ever, emanating from the abyss that was the cave mouth, and although I did have my own internal thoughts reminding me of the dangers, I chose to descend. This being my first time exploring a cave of this scale, I was accompanied by a relatively, and disappointingly, large team of 3 fellow rookie cavers led by 2 veterans. We walked into the entrance to the first of many shafts we would have to climb down. The leaders had tied a rope to a tree a short distance from the mouth and lowered it into its shaft. One of them went down, and the remaining one helped lower us down one by one. It took me 5 minutes to scale it down. They then followed us, and we set forth into a tunnel, which led us to a narrow gap in the wall we were told we had to crawl through on all 4s. The crawl was 15 meters long, but we felt surprisingly safe thanks to our chaperones. When I crawled out the other end of the passage into a 6x6 room and turned back, I realized that the light of day that followed us had now completely disappeared, and our torches were the only thing letting us see. Though that was a matter of course. The surface was out of reach now of our hands and our eyes, and if we were to turn our lights off, our eyes would never adjust to the dark. Another reminder that I was right to bring backup lights and a whole lot of glow sticks with me. We turned back and went down a path, right underneath the one we had come through, one we would have totally missed if not for our guides. I braced myself for the unknown. For a few hours or so, our guides led us through some more shafts and tunnels, both narrow and wide, of the maze, describing the hallmarks we went through, and telling of their own experiences and discoveries in it. I almost felt cheated hearing them speak of how they had violated the sacred wonderland I was supposed to explore. But I knew better than to tell them about it. They also explained how caving is actually not as scary as most would believe, and you're only really in trouble if you get injured, or lack supplies, equipment, or company. That made sense, considering how easy it had seemed, but it too carried with it a feeling of dissatisfaction, a feeling that I had been cheating. We had to descend for 5 hours before we reached the first supply camp, a large limestone chamber 1,500 feet underground and 22 meters wide. We rested there, cooked and ate our canned food, and slept. I wondered if I would still have dreams of the cave, since I was now inside it. I was not disappointed. In my dream, I was in that same cave, but had no one with me and had to descend it on my own. I crawled through a passage that got narrower the further I got, until the walls felt like the coils of a boa constrictor, crushing the life out of me. I was woken up just then, and we headed for the next camp. The trip was much the same, except there were more narrow passages that we had to crawl through on our torsos. We reached the second camp by descending a 60-foot column into a much bigger chamber more than 3,000 feet underground. Our guides told us this one split into various paths and chambers to scout, and we would be choosing one of those to explore the next day. Around this time we had heard the sound of water flowing that was much louder than what we had been hearing up till now. The leader told us that it was probably some rainwater that ended up flowing into the cave. Seeing the worried looks on our faces, he added that it was nothing to worry about. The water would most likely take one of the passages to flow into, and it would have to fill up almost the entire cave before reaching us. So even if something were to happen, we would have plenty of time to escape. We did the same as the first camp. We rested, ate, and slept, and I was in the middle of yet another cave dream when I was woken up by the thunderous sound of crashing water. Upon asking, the leader regrettably told us that the worst-case scenario had happened. The water was rising way faster than expected, and we needed to leave. They made preparations to climb the shaft while we gathered only the most important items so as to not slow us down. I felt heartbroken. I do not want to leave. This is what my whole life has led up to. Such thoughts clouded my mind as I tried to figure out what to take and what to leave behind. We still had thousands of feet to climb, so obviously I needed the food. The lights were definitely important too, so was my climbing gear. As I was figuring things out, the guide told me the others had started ascending the shaft again, so I threw my backpack on, catching a glimpse of concern on his face, and tied the harness around myself. I started to climb, but upon reaching the shaft, saw how much the water had increased, and was crashing down the same column I would have to climb. We could not climb through that water pressure, and I signaled as such to the guide. We regrettably lowered ourselves back down and hurried as we tried to find some place we could take shelter from the water. We chose one of the passages that sloped upward and crawled its narrow tunnel up until it sloped downward again. We came into a small room, this one more like 5 by 5 feet. We sat down and caught our breath and tried to analyze the situation. The two of us were the only ones left behind. We hoped that the rest of the team managed to make it to safety, but that did not ease our feeling of being trapped. The guide told me that we did not have to worry. We could try to follow this passage and reach the third camp. Maybe it had survived too. Listening to that made me feel relieved, and upon realizing that I wondered, was I relieved that we would get out of the cave, or was I relieved that we could continue to descend? Did I take so much time packing up not out of confusion, but hoping for this exact thing to happen? The more I thought about it, the more it disturbed me. This was the first time I felt fear of my own greed, but it would not be the last. Regardless, I chose to continue my descent. It took us another few hours to get to the next camp, and we reached there after squeezing through a tiny claustrophobic tunnel 9 inches wide that stretched out for 30 meters. It was a grueling process, all the more so with just the two of us, but we pushed through. Upon making it to the camp, we felt overwhelmingly relieved and helped ourselves to the supplies available. After some much-needed rest and relaxation, the guide pulled out his map and started to review the next plan. He told me that there was actually a passage that led directly upwards, and that is what we would be using to get back to the surface. I was not paying much attention, however. My mind was overcome by the dread again, dread of the demon I had come to know as my greed. I saw that right below the passage the guide said would lead us upwards. There was another passage going downwards. As soon as I saw that, my mind let go of everything else. Every other sound, feeling, everything in my visual view was pushed out of my observation. All I could think was, I want to go there. The guide had to shake me to bring me back to my senses. He was concerned for me and told me to sleep for now. we would start our ascent the next day. The both of us laid down to sleep together on the wet rocks. I was awoken a few hours into my sleep. I lay on my side, seeing the cave we were supposed to take visible in the faint light right in front of me, its entrance slightly illuminated, as if showing us the hope inside its mouth and up its liberating climb. Below that, however, was something different. Below that was a Stygian abyss that not only gazed into me as I into it, but also called out to me. The call started out as a seducing whisper, slowly growing into a pleading moan and eventually going even further into a chilling cry that beseeched, commanded, threatened me to enter it. It was deafening. I could not move. I could not do anything. I understood this was just another nightmare, though, that did not make it any easier. The call seemed more than an audiation of my own greed. It was really there. An infernal siren of the depths, making itself known to no one but me. It was so much more terrifying than being chased by cave monsters or crushed by sentient rocks. I was paralyzed, and I felt so frightened and helpless. I was woken up by the guide around that part. He seemed concerned for me, but I told him I was okay. He told me it was finally time to go, and we had to gather our equipment and supplies. I stocked up on food and water. I was free to take my time this time. He told me that there was a column that we had to scale up, and this time he would go first to see if it was safe, and I would have to wait. I waited for a while, trying my best to avoid so much as looking at the passage below. However, I could not ignore the voices calling out to me. It felt agonizing to resist it. It was also infuriating. I thought I could make it end so much sooner if I just confronted the call and screamed at those demons to stop bothering me once and for all. And so I turned around and snapped my gaze to the entrance with determination to assert dominance over the voices. Unlike anything I could have expected, though, the voices stopped before I could even say anything. They were now replaced by utter silence, broken only by the dripping cave water and the distant sounds of the guide trying to climb high above. I felt tricked. This was what I wanted. The voices had ceased. The entrance to the passage that up till now felt like an impossible, maddening void was just another cave entrance, its mouth illuminated by my light. I now felt none of the pressures I felt forcing me to descend. That, however, was not comforting in the least. The pressure had been replaced with angst. I was free to go up the passage, reunite with the team, and come back sometime later to explore the same passage again, and nothing would be different. I now had my free will back. I could choose, and that was the reason behind the angst. The fact that I now had nothing pushing me to descend. It was just my own desire, my demon of greed. I wanted to go down there. Despite it being common sense that me and the guide needed each other to get to the surface, despite the fact that caving alone meant almost certain death, I wanted to leave him behind. I remembered how unsatisfied I felt, traveling with my companions. It all came back to me. How much I felt the cave belonged to me. How I felt it my right to explore its still virgin passages. And that brought me to terms with my desire. Thus I stepped down into the lower entrance. I chose to descend. It started off with a rocky path that sloped downwards, and I rushed down it. I could hear the guide calling out to me in the distance, and I had to get away from him, or he would come to take me back. I hoped he would not follow me, and could manage to somehow reach the surface without me. I had no intention of going with him. I had memorized a bit of the map, and knew that this passage split into several down the line. I just had to get there fast. I hurried as much as I could, ducking down under the stalactites, and reached the fork in the cave. I chose one, at random, and hurried down it. And just like that, I was out of the guide's reach. I slowed down and took my time, basically strolling ahead and checking out the path in front of me with my light. There was much less of a chance the guide would catch up to me now, and he was not stupid enough to risk going into the wrong path on his own. At least, I hoped he was not. If he decided to come after me out of a sense of responsibility, well, I wished him luck, but I would not want to go back to him. I still hoped he would find safety, but he did not concern me anymore. I was now free to enjoy my time here. I had a fair amount of equipment and supplies. I was able to find my own way through the tunnels and shafts through grit alone. Yes, I was blaspheming by going alone into unknown territory, but I just did not think about it. I simply chose to descend. A few hours in, I felt hungry and took a lunch break. I had a lot of food bars and unwrapped one of them to savor in the light of my glow stick. I took a moment to take in the environment. I was sitting in a slightly sloping tunnel about 2 meters wide, a tunnel that sounded wet. The only sound I could hear was the dripping of water echoing through the moist caverns. I felt the humidity too, on my skin and in my nose as I breathed in the musty, earthy smell. There was no turning back for me now. I would be spending the rest of my life in these wet paths. The dripping water was all I would ever hear. At least, that is what I thought, until another sound caught me off guard. I heard the sound of rock sliding over rock. I was confused. What could have made that sound? Was there someone else there? I thought the guide actually managed to catch up to me, but that was impossible. I was following my own path blindly. How could he have caught up to me just like that? The sound continued. I called out to him, and the sound stopped. My glow stick went out around the same time. What I heard next was something akin to shuffling. Not the shuffling of human feet, no, for there was no recognizable rhythm of bipedal motion. But it definitely was the sound of something moving. Maybe more like a large sack of gravel dragging along the ground. This was the first time I was made to feel external fear. All of a sudden, the water was not the only thing I could hear anymore. Besides that noise, I could also hear my own heart thumping in my chest, fueled by an apprehensive rush of adrenaline. I was breathing heavily, shivering in the total darkness. There was something else with me here, something alive, but not human, and that something was aware of my presence. I flashed back to my nightmares. I did not know what to do. The sound stopped, but that was replaced by a feeling that I was now being watched. I felt the presence of the thing that was making the sound. It was now right at the end of the tunnel, only a few feet away, and could very well see me. And then it just stayed that way. For a few minutes. For an hour. For several hours. All the while I was paralyzed with restless agitation. And then I heard the sound of it moving again. It was gone. Just like that. I jolted as if snapped out of a trance, panting heavily, and started crying. I had just come into contact with something I had no knowledge of, something I could not even see. For the first time, I had faced the fear of the unknown, and it was that fear that brought me back to my senses. What the hell was I doing? I did not want to explore anymore. I wanted to go home and forget this cave even existed. I turned on my light and looked back up to the way I came. And I remembered I was only blindly following along and had no idea how to get back. Besides, that was the way the creature had come anyway. I looked the other way, down the way I was heading. I heard the siren's call to descent again. I whimpered and tears welled up in my eyes once more. That was the only choice I had. There was no turning back. Hesitant, I once again obeyed those whispers. Once again, I chose to descend. I would not come across that kind of creature again as I traveled the caves for days, following the siren's whispers. I slept when I wanted to sleep, ate when I wanted to eat, and went when I wanted to go. But I could not stop descending. When one of my lights ran out, I switched to another one. All I could do was keep moving, and eventually the food inevitably ran out. When it did, I thought my time had finally come. I now had no choice but to starve to death. That is, until I came across an underground lake. And in it I found a creature. It was no alien monster, but a simple cave bug, and before I could think, I grabbed it and shoved it into my mouth. And thus, my demise was prolonged, and my diet shifted to the critters and lizards I found in the cave. Eventually, my water ran out too, and I started drinking from any source of water I found in the cave. I knew it was not safe or pleasant to consume, and neither were the critters. But I was not in control of my body now. It was moving on its own, and would rather die painfully of disease and exhaustion than stop or starve. I somehow managed to avoid any major injuries, and the voices compelled me to ignore any minor cuts and scrapes. My body kept delaying my fate with every smallest chance of survival, and I could only keep moving as I waited in agony for the release of death. I would keep moving for some more days, maybe weeks, or even months, until I wondered if I was closer to the Earth's core than to the surface. It was definitely getting warmer. After some time, as I squeezed through the nth tunnel, I dropped onto a muddy floor, which caught me off guard, as it had been a while since I had seen anything other than boulder slopes. I stood up and examined the area, which seemed like a warm and slightly misty cavern, around 10 meters in diameter, its floor muddied by water dripping from the stalactites. I walked around and tripped forward almost instantly as my foot caught onto something. I tried to see what it was that had tripped me and stumbled back again, as I realized it to be a human-sized skeleton. I got up again and approached it nervously, and picked it up to observe it. It was definitely the size of a human, but not human at all. The skull, for one, seemed more like that of a reptile, and the bones, although thicker and stronger than human bones, seemed hollow. It had 8 limbs, 4 of which seemed like arms, 2 like legs, and 2 that fit the function of both. Each limb ended in 4 finger-like appendages. The ribcage-esque part was a lot wider and denser, and expanded to cover almost the entire torso, and brought to mind a turtle shell. The best way to describe it would be a combination of an insect and a tortoise skeleton. This was clearly a creature unlike anything humans knew. I looked around. There were at least 4 more such fossils, mostly buried in the mud. Once again, I was reminded of my cave nightmares. I remembered the creature I had met in the dark back then, the one that for some reason chose to spare me. I had not been able to see it then, but I remember the sounds it made, which looking back could have been akin to what some giant, muscular, vermiform organism would be like. These things were clearly different. I trudged through the mud in a hurry, wanting not to spend a second more in that damned chamber. I just could not wrap my mind around the fact that I had come across not one, but 2 species that had been living unbeknownst to us so far below the surface. I did not want to think about it, but I could not just stop thinking either. How long had these things been around for? Were they simply animals, or were they intelligent like us? What would happen if I were to come across one of them? What would they do to me? Were there other such abominations here? Were my dreams more than just dreams? I shivered as I walked around. The thoughts were too excruciating for me. After walking for a while, I found the way out, which was a steep and muddy slope downwards. Without a moment's hesitation, I jumped in and slid down it. This time I landed on a rocky surface that was only slightly muddy. In front of me, however, was total darkness. I was confused. I checked my torch. It was on, but shining it in front of me revealed nothing beside a pitch-black darkness. I looked around and down and realized I was on a sort of escarpment, a cliff edge next to the wall. The edge went along the wall and sloped down, though that was all I could see. I did not know how deep it went or how vast this giant cavern in front of me was. My torchlight dispersed after only a few feet in front of me. It had nothing to reflect off, nothing to illuminate ahead. The cosmic terror enveloped me again. Up till now, when I stared into the darkness of the caves, I could feel it staring back into me, as if it was enjoying how much it intimated me. This was nothing like that. The abyssal void I faced now felt like it did not so much as notice my presence. It did not care how I felt. It did not care if I was even here. Yet it was right in front of me, seeming to expand its cold, uncaring tendrils of horrifying nothingness into and beyond me, stretching fathomlessly deep below, cosmically vast around, and endlessly unending within. No description would ever be enough to capture it. It was like meeting God and peering right into his sheer, true, innate and raw cosmic indifference, like dissolving yourself in the soup of total infinity itself. It was truly and utterly maddening. After shuddering in maddened despair for hours on end, I heard the siren again, and again I answered it by forcing my rubbery legs to follow the path along the cave wall. Walking down around the darkness, I could not help but try to encapsulate its vastness by my reason. It was an underground cavity, clearly, but the sheer size was far beyond anything thought possible. The entire cavern should have collapsed under the pressure of the rocks above it. I wondered if it was the cause of deliberate intervention. Even if it was, though, I could not so much as guess what any comprehensible purpose of it was in the first place. One possibility, that I hoped to God was not true, was that it was as a nest for some other sort of beast of incredible yet terrible proportions. After walking for hours on end, until the call to descent itself faded out, I found another exit on the side of the same path. I made no second thought choosing that foot-wide tunnel over the aggravating spiral that ran uninterrupted down for who knows how long. I half crawled, half slid my way down it, and ended up in another chamber. This one having nothing suspicious, but had the entrance to a shaft. Thinking it was still better than the void I had come from, I scaled it down and followed the passage it led to. It was on that path that my exhaustion caught up to me. I put my equipment down, turned my light off, and curled up to sleep while still holding it. For a while now the cave dreams had stopped haunting me, but they were replaced with something more torturous. Like many times before since I had been lost underground, I remembered the time before I had set foot in these damn places. I remembered the companions I came with and had abandoned for my own insolent greed. I regretted everything up to that point. I cursed myself for wasting my life chasing these rock mazes. This cave did not belong to me. I belonged to it. I should have lived my life like everyone else, and not some cave-worshipping fool. Even if I had come here, I should have stayed with my crew and followed my instructors. I prayed, more sincerely than I ever had in my life, for a chance to go back, to trade every choice I had made that brought me here for a simple chance to be back on the surface. I cried myself to sleep, wishing I would wake up at home. Having spent so long down here, I had gotten used to waking up in total darkness. That is why I slept with a torch in my hand. I would wake up, rub my eyes, and turn it on before getting ready to move on again, which is precisely why I was too confused and still considered myself to be dreaming. When I woke up and found I could just barely see the rock wall in front of me, I looked at my torch. It was off. I turned it on, examined the passage, and off again. It got dark, but my eyes adjusted after a while and I could see again. There was light here. I punched the wall to see if I was not dreaming. After my painful yet overjoyed confirmation, I grabbed my things and set forth, hoping to find the source of the literal light at the end of the tunnel. I was almost jogging. The hope had brought forth a hidden feeling of excitement I had forgotten long ago. The tunnel went on for some few dozen meters, and the air was now starting to get more humid. I could feel my heart thumping in my chest as I took the last turn and faced the exit that had a few rays of light shooting through its mouth. I stepped forth and cried out in awe at the sight in front of me. It was a city, an underground metropolis, or the ruins of one at least. I had come out into the bottom of a massive valley of some sort, one that seemed to almost stretch out and up forever, but one that did end, appearing like a crack in the ceiling, one lit up with daylight. It was actually really deep, however, around 6 kilometers by my estimate. That is how far below I had wandered. Still, the exit was right there. The walls of the trench had buildings, structures and bridges either carved or built into it, and they seemed to extend along the walls right up to the surface. In the near distance, on the bottom surface, there was a dense network of bridges leading to and from a condensed cluster of tall spires and prism-shaped buildings, with a pyramidal structure in the dead center of the cluster that towered above the others and resembled a Sumerian ziggurat. I could tell it was abandoned as the structures were all covered in vines and moss, surprising to find any at this depth, and there were no sounds to signal any active population. There were distant sounds of birds and other wildlife, though, which were again strange to hear at this depth. I looked around in marvel at a city the likes of which I had never been aware of. Then I remembered the discoveries I had made up till now, and the marvel changed into the same, now familiar fear of the unknown. Perhaps this city was not a human construction. Knowing that, I started retreating back into despair, now added on to the fact that I did not know where I should go. I had been following a single path and had not come across any possible alternatives. I definitely did not want to go back to that pit of blackness, but it could not have been safe walking around in this place on my own either. Next came the sensation from back when I encountered the creature in the dark, the feeling of being watched. There was definitely something, or things hidden somewhere in those ruins, and I did not want to step forth in there. I felt cornered and helpless again. I leaned against the wall of the entrance I had come out of and contemplated taking my own life to just get it over with, as I hopelessly looked around what I could see in the city. My eyes drifted back to the ziggurat in the middle and the cluster of buildings and bridges around it. I scanned the paths of the bridges and traced one that seemed to lead up to the surface. I traced it back down to the ground, and my eyes followed the path I would have to take to reach it. I still felt eyes on me. The danger still lingered. Slitting my throat still seemed the best way out, but maybe, just maybe, I could make it. Maybe if I held on to the faint glimmer of hope, I could go back to the life I so took for granted. I stood up again, keeping low and carefully sneaking around, in a way that I knew was really pointless, given how in plain sight I was, but had to be tried. I walked crouched down and moving along the right wall. It was something I felt I had to do, but it still did not make me feel any safer. Being so close to the wall and touching it made me realize it was not a valley at all, but an artificially constructed straight wall, strewn with writings and hieroglyphs, none of which I understood, or even wanted to. That being said, I did see a lot of drawings and carvings of some particular giant amorphous beast. One I could at my best describe as having the features of a slug, an arachnid, and a reptile. The path was also now littered with geothermal vents, a few of which I had been coming across for a while back when traveling through the caverns. The difference being that these vents apparently had broken the paved ground and seeped through it, enveloping the path and lower parts of the city with a warm mist. It did make sense, considering how far below I was at that point. Before I knew it, I had been walking through the underneath of the heart of the city. Whatever watched me had not harmed me so far. It could even just have been my own exaggerated sense of danger. The buildings I wanted to reach were relatively close to me now. The path I would take to get to the surface was an incline starting from the floor, and lay atop of a building that tapered underneath it to the ground. I wondered how this city functioned, what the point of that unique cluster was, and how many aeons this city dated back. Maybe even before us. There was the tiniest sense of curiosity telling me to explore this city, but it was far overwhelmed by my fear and caution. I wanted to get out of here as soon as possible. Although perhaps, if I managed to make it, I could bring home probably the greatest discovery in history. This added sense of possible fame rekindled the embers of hope in my heart. All the anxiety was now gone. The sounds of the wilderness far above me now sounded like a greeting. I was now a lot less afraid, and in much more of a hurry to head up that path and back home. Thus, I had forgotten about caution and was now sprinting in a straight line, wading through the increasingly hot mist. To the way home I could see ahead. I saw the ramp get closer as I ran, my eyes glowing with joy and gratitude, and planned to run right up it. Just as I reached the base, though, all of that stopped all at once as I heard it. That wretched siren, the one that had been with me up till now, the one that made me come down here in the first place. It was back, and it had now drowned out all other sounds around me. Waves of confusion, disbelief, discomfort all washed over me, all. Why? Why now? The way outside was right in front of me. I had decided I wanted no more of this descent. Besides, where else would I go? I stood fidgeting, and then looked around for the source of that sound, where it was calling me to now. Then I saw it. Another cave, right beside the ramp, on the side of the wedged building. It was enveloped in mist, and now called out to me hauntingly. I shook my head in unbelief. No, I do not want to go there. But the voice, it just will not stop. I turned on my light to see inside its entrance. It turned on, flickered a bit, and went back out. It had no more battery. I had no other torch left, and I had used up all of my glow sticks. If I went in there, I would be going in totally blind, and had no idea what I would encounter there. Just some more endless caves, or perhaps some other abominable beast. Perhaps a whole world totally different to what I had seen up till now. Perhaps something else entirely. It was hotter than the vents around me, hot enough to make me sweat buckets while standing outside it. I was dehydrated, and I had not eaten in days, as I had not been able to find even any bugs to eat. And despite the sounds of the wildlife above me, there was no such thing for me here either, and the voice sounded like it did not want me to go up even to secure food. The prospect of a way out had given me some hopeful energy, but now I was running on fumes. I felt sick. By all accounts, I would not return alive if I chose to go down there. I looked back up to the path leading to the surface. Hope, a way home, it was right there. Yet despair had the audacity to call out to me now, when it was right in front of my grasp. How to survive in hell. I woke up in a birthing sack. Panicked and choking on amniotic fluid, I clawed at the fleshy walls, fighting with all my terrified strength to free myself. With a wet ripping sound, I was dumped onto the muddy cobbles of the street below, twisting my ankle as I landed. Cold rain blasted my naked body clean of the sack's liquid. I tried and failed to get to my feet. The street was alien to me, an insane medley of architecture ranging from the modern to the prehistoric. The sky above boiled with storm clouds, illuminating my surroundings with non-stop flashes of lightning. A man walked over to me. His hair was matted with filth, and the rain streaked down his mismatched leather clothes. He said nothing, just watched me squirm on the floor. "Please," I gasped. "Help me." He answered by slamming a foot down on my face, breaking my jaw and making my vision reel. He moved onto my limbs, stamping and tugging until he heard the bones snap. Crippled, naked, and screaming, there was nothing I could do to defend myself when he started to eat me alive. My introduction to hell wasn't unusual. Very few people survive their first hour, let alone their first night. When they die, they go through the same thing again, emerging from a new birthing sack in another part of the city. Eventually, they learn to attack the first person they see, and if they're lucky, they'll be able to kill that person. That's the one rule of hell. the strong take from the weak. Get used to the idea, and you might just make it through the afterlife. I'm going to give you a helping hand. Consider this your handbook to hell, a primer on the inferno. Make no mistake, though, I'm not doing this out of the goodness of my heart. When you die, you'll owe me one. Don't worry about trying to find me. I guarantee we'll run into each other eventually. Eternity is a long fucking time, so it's a matter of when rather than if. Do as I tell you, and you'll have a better chance than most of avoiding my own nasty introduction to the pit. Welcome to hell. Some people swear they saw a light at the end of the tunnel when they died. To my mind, those people either hallucinated or they're lying. Most of us just wake up in a birthing sack a few minutes after death. The buildings of hell are covered in the things, horrible yellow-brown pimples growing out of the brick. I've already mentioned that the first thing you need to do is claw your way out and get ready to fight. This is where the real bitch of the situation comes into play, since not everybody has the strength to break through their sack's flesh. You get the body you had just before you died, see? So, let's say you were born a cripple, or maybe you died too young or too old. Tough shit. You're going to have a rough eternity drowning in birthing fluid over and over. If you manage to break free of your sack, don't waste time moping around, wondering what the fuck happened. Get on your feet and get ready to defend yourself. Chances are good that the first person who sees you will be hungry. There are no plants or animals in hell, so cannibalism is your only option if you don't fancy starving to death and having to start over. Aim to kill the first person you see. It might take a few tries. Most of hell's residents have been fighting for survival a lot longer than you. They might have armor made from tanned skin, scavenged metal and bone. They'll almost certainly have a shiv, club, or axe. All of that will be useful to you if you can take it from them. The next thing to do is find shelter. It never stops raining in hell, and pneumonia is a shitty way to die. Luckily, you'll have a selection of buildings to choose from. Ever wanted to live in a rundown Victorian manor with half a roof and no furniture? How about an ancient Egyptian mud brick hovel? If people have built it, you can find a crumbling version of it in hell. Pick a building, kill any squatters you find and move in. The best houses are the ones that come with a supply of scrap metal and timber. Not only are these good for making weapons with, they're also vital for getting drinkable water. I learned the hard way that hell's rain is teeming with disease. It has to be boiled before it's safe, so getting a fire going and something to make a bowl with is a necessity. So, we've killed our first man and found a home. Things are going well. Get that far, and you're going to want to hang on to what you have forever. You won't. Something will kill you eventually, and you'll have to start over. My record is a year. If you want to beat that, you'll need to understand hell and its denizens. The damned. The people of hell can be grouped into two categories. The first, the fresh meat, are those who've just climbed out of a birthing sack. It's kill or be killed when it comes to fresh meat. Always has been. The newly birthed want clothing and tools, and will kill to get hold of them. The second category, the residents, view fresh meat as a quick and easy supply of food, leather and bone. Residents have an easier time of it for sure, and all of them will fight to retain their resident status for as long as they can. Make no mistake though, residents victimize each other just as much as they prey on the fresh meat. If you're a woman, for instance, well, you better get over any hang-ups you have about rape. Women get raped in hell far more than men. It's just a fact. If you're not one of those bodybuilders or warrior women, do the smart thing and prostitute yourself for protection. Self-respect doesn't keep you breathing. Remember how you get the body you had just before you died? Well, that fact forms the core of hell's society. The truth of the matter is that throughout history, it's usually been men who die in battle. That means that in hell, There are a lot of men with young, strong bodies fit for war. Don't like it? Tough. Those are the guys who call the shots. If you can't fight them, you better do as they tell you. If you live long enough and fight well enough, you might get invited into one of the resident tribes. These are groups of people who band together for the sake of safety in numbers. Believe me, being part of a group makes things a lot easier in hell. However, keep in mind that you're only part of the tribe for as long as you're a resident. Get yourself killed, and it's back to being fresh meat. Tribes offer the closest thing to civilized society you'll find in hell. If you're part of a tribe, you have people on your side who probably won't kill you unless shit gets rough. Doesn't sound like much, but that's about as good as it gets. My own survival record was thanks to getting into a tribe. Life was good for a while there. We had about 50 soldiers and plenty of girls to fuck. Nobody could touch us, and the men abided by an honor code, so the usual fear of being stabbed in the back by your friends wasn't too much of an issue. I could have spent my eternity in reasonable comfort, but hell has ways of fucking over a good thing. Human flesh and boiled rainwater doesn't exactly make for a balanced diet, and sooner or later, even the strongest resident dies of malnutrition. I did well to last a year on it, though the last few months were agony. If I believed in God, I'd swear he designed hell in such a way that nobody stays on top of the food chain for long. The city and the wasteland. Most of the damned live in Dis, the city of hell. That's where all the fresh meat is born, and considering the size of the place coupled with the short life expectancy, a lot of people will spend eternity without ever setting foot outside of Dis. Take my advice. Do not leave the city. Things are rough on the streets, that's true. But trust me when I say it gets a whole lot worse if you try to leave. Dis is surrounded by a wasteland called Gehenna. At first glance, it doesn't look like much, just an empty expanse of gray stretching out into infinity. Sometimes the damned lose that fire in the belly, the will to survive, and set off wandering into Gehenna. Most of them never come back. I made the walk myself once, a long time ago. I don't care how hard you think you are. Spend enough time in hell, and it starts to break you down. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I'm a good person who never deserved this. Nobody can say that and not be a liar. I'm not evil, though, or rather, I wasn't. Not until I got to hell. You murder, rape, and torture because you know they do the same to you. You're murdered, raped, and tortured because they know you'll do the same to them. Give it long enough and you just don't want to face it anymore. That's when you take the walk into Gehenna. The first couple of miles I walked were nothing special. The rain stopped after a while, the sludge beneath my feet giving way to gray ash, and I caught my first glimpse of hell's sky beyond the clouds. It was a flat gray with a white sun, completely devoid of beauty or warmth. I trudged on. While walking through Gehenna, I lost any urge to eat, drink, or sleep. My body started to waste away, but I didn't care. Even when my skin started to peel away and my bones were exposed, I didn't care. The further I walked, the hollower I became in mind, body, and soul. I don't know what would have happened if I'd kept going. Frankly, I don't want to know. Some part of me still wanted to live, so I turned back. I'd walked for days, maybe weeks, yet when I turned around, Dis was only a few steps away. I stepped back into the city and my body finally fell apart. When I emerged from my birthing sack, I swore never to step foot into Gehenna again. Escaping from hell. There are ways to leave hell. That should be obvious. Otherwise, I wouldn't be talking to you, would I? Sometimes the living get it into their heads that they want to talk with the dead. They get their crystals, incense, and spirit boards in the hopes of reaching their loved ones. Most do nothing more than trick themselves into thinking they've made contact. They smile or cry, convinced their beloved granny is playing the harp on a cloud somewhere before getting on with their lives. A few have the skill to actually reach us, though. They can open a gate between hell and the world of the living that we perceive as a pillar of fire stretching down from the clouds. As soon as one of those pillars shows up, the damned scramble to be the first to get to it. You haven't seen the true nature of man until you've watched thousands of the damned swarming over each other, kicking, biting, and clawing to be the one who escapes. Contacting the dead always results in a bloodbath. Even the most civilized tribes fall apart the instant it becomes clear that only one of them can leave. I've left hell twice now, left my body behind and ridden that pillar of fire up into the clouds. Some people believe that you can be possessed by demons. Let me tell you something. Demons aren't real. What the living see as demonic possession is just one of the damned testing out their new body. Let's face it, if you've fought your way through hell to get back to the world of the living, you're not going to be on your best behavior for long. Sooner or later, we take things too far. Our host dies, or their family cave and recruit an exorcist. Then we're fresh out of the birthing sack and on the streets again. I'm gonna go now. When you get to hell, remember my advice and that you owe me one. Maybe we can form a tribe someday. For the time being, though, I want to see what my new body can do. By now, you should have a good idea of what you can expect from hell. You know to kill the first person you see when you fight your way out of a birthing sack. You know to find clothing, tools, and shelter. You know that no matter what you do, how well you do, someday it's back to being fresh meat. Dis is the biggest city you can imagine. Tribes fight and die for territory, and taking a wrong turn is a fucking death sentence. You'll get a feel for where you should and shouldn't go eventually. Develop the kind of street smarts you need to stay a resident for more than a day. Even so, there are places in Des that you should know about. Let's do a little sightseeing tour of hell. Maybe the advance warning will do you some good. Skin Street. Allow me to tell you about the first time I saw Skin Street. I dropped out of my birthing sack onto the road, stood straight back up, and got myself ready to fight. Nobody was there. Not one single person was out on a street that stretched for miles in either direction. I relaxed a little and took a look around. Most of the streets in Dice are a labyrinthine network of buildings. You spend most of your stay in hell paranoid that, just around the next corner, there's someone ready to beat you down. Skin Street isn't like that. It's a single straight line with only the rain and the darkness to hamper visibility. I felt more vulnerable there than I've felt in any other part of Dis. You ever walked into a wide, empty space and suddenly felt exposed? Yeah, imagine also being naked, unarmed, and in hell. Still, I knew what I was supposed to do. The first step was to find some clothing. That's where I learned how Skin Street got its name. Every building, every busted street light and gas lamp was decorated with flayed skin. I'd been in hell long enough by that point to not be too freaked out, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't affect me. In a fucked up kind of way, it reminded me of Christmas. You know? People hanging wreaths and lights from their houses, that sort of thing. I remembered the time I'd spent with my family, with my kids on Christmas morning. Feelings like that get you killed. I pushed them back down and pulled some scraps from the nearest building. If somebody was going to leave clothing material lying about, I may as well take it, right? I didn't know it at the time, but every step I took on Skin Street was being watched. When the attack came, I didn't even get a glimpse of the guy. Bang. My skull fractured from an expert swing of a club. Whoever hit me went for my eyes the second I hit the floor, stuck his fingers right into my sockets. I was blind and crying like a baby when he started to peel away my skin. Here's the thing. Some people are fucked up even by hell's standards. The loners, serial killers, stalkers, and psychos all make their way to Skin Street in the end. Most of the damned use the whole body of a kill, but the Skin Street people like to take trophies. They leave their ornaments out as bait for the ignorant, skulking in the shadows and waiting for the best moment to ambush. If you find yourself on Skin Street, you're going to have to think fast. Forget clothing. Just grab a rock, piece of wood, or anything else you can use as a weapon. Stay out of the shadows, keep checking behind you, and get out of there as quickly as you can. Perdition Farms. You're going to be chased in hell. That's unavoidable. At some point you'll stumble into somebody bigger than you, or you'll find yourself outnumbered. Forget about a fair fight. If somebody can take you down without you fighting back, you bet that's what they'll do. It's easy to lose focus when you're running for your life. You can forget to pay attention to your surroundings. That, my friend, is a big mistake. The outskirts of Perdition Farms are littered with billboards. They promise free food and safety to anybody fucking stupid enough to believe them. The tribes that fight over that particular territory like to herd people off the streets and into the industrial complex they call home. The good news is that those tribes won't kill you. The bad news is that they're big fans of taking people alive. They've got a project, you see. Been working on it for as long as I can remember. I couldn't tell you who originally decided that hell should have organized food production. Only that the idea stuck, and that over the years, countless tribes have taken it upon themselves to try and make that dream a reality. Get yourself captured by them, and you can look forward to a bit of slave labor. For the most part, the Perdition Farms tribes try to make use of the birthing pods as a source of food. They force their slaves to harvest them from the walls, grind them up in industrial vats, mix them with blood, body parts, rainwater, and anything else that could conceivably make a broth. The life of a slave is short, brutal, and disgusting, particularly when those slaves are then used as guinea pigs for the latest concoction. You see, amniotic fluid can be drunk if you're desperate, though drinking too much is guaranteed to make you empty your stomach from every available orifice. The flesh of the sacs is a different matter, though. I couldn't tell you exactly what the birthing sacs are. Some people say they're actual flesh, while others swear they're more like a fungus. What I do know is that they repair themselves over time. Eat some of their flesh, and over the next few days you'll grow a new birthing sac inside you. It's a small mercy that you won't live long enough to see it break through your skin. You'll be dead shortly after your stomach bursts. If you're lucky, your days as a slave will end when the tribe decides they want some real meat. They're not stupid enough to test their broth themselves, not when there's no shortage of slaves in hell. Look, I can't force you to stay out of Perdition Farms. I can only offer advice. In my opinion, if you think you're being herded there, it's better to take whatever's to hand and cut your own throat. I'd take fresh meat status 100 times before spending another day on the farms. The boneyard. So maybe you're thinking to yourself, hey, I'm the kind of nutjob who'd join a cult. Is there anything in hell for me? If that sounds like you, the boneyard has you covered. You see, there's a certain kind of religious fanatic who really does belong in hell. I'm not talking about the old dears who bake cakes to raise money for the new church roof here. I'm talking about the guys who went to war because God commanded it, who burned women for supposedly consorting with demons, and who saw nothing wrong with fucking the odd kid. When those people get to hell, they're too thick-headed to make sense of what happened. Why face reality when you can pretend it's all just a test of faith? They find like-minded folk in the boneyard. I'm told that at one time, the boneyard was a cathedral surrounded by a cemetery that stretched from horizon to horizon. Maybe that's true. I don't know. These days, it's a shanty town of temples and churches built from materials scavenged from the streets. Everywhere you look, you'll find wild-eyed zealots preaching their own twisted version of redemption and gangs of masked men on the prowl for fresh converts. Mortification of the flesh is the main pastime in the boneyard. If you listen to the cacophony of sermons, you'll be informed of how the flesh is wicked and must be purged of sin. How lucky we are to be given such a holy duty. How fortunate to be given the opportunity to redeem ourselves before God. The people of the boneyard have had a long time and plenty of fucking practice when it comes to mastering torture and degradation. I'm not a good person. I've killed, raped, and cannibalized, but I can honestly tell you I'd never have been able to dream up some of the shit that goes on in the boneyard. I wandered in there by accident once, and I've never been able to get what I saw out of my brain. I watched a woman, naked and bound, forced onto her knees and violated with iron rods. A preacher sewed his own eyes and lips shut in front of a crowd before sawing off his manhood with a piece of slate. A boy of maybe 14 was publicly crucified. A girl was drowned in shit. An older man had sharpened flint pushed under his fingernails. I could list off 100 other atrocities done in the name of redemption. Stay away from the boneyard. The people there decided that hell just isn't hellish enough for their liking. Forget about redemption. Forget about God. The only way out of hell is by riding a pillar of fire and taking over a living body. Focus on that if you want to escape. The damned can't offer you salvation. The damned only offer pain. I have to leave you soon. If I'm to make the most of life on earth, I'm afraid I'm going to have to skip town. While I've had plenty to keep myself entertained, this body just isn't suitable for a run-in with the police. It's only a matter of time until some nosy neighbor thinks to pick up the phone. With the humidity over the last few days, Mummy and Daddy are already pretty ripe. Here's something you have to understand. Hell is a big place. I've given you fair warning about a few of the locations I myself have run into, and that will have to do. Even if I wrote a library's worth of novels solely dedicated to mapping out the distinct locations within D's, I still couldn't tell you everything about the city. What I can do is give you a bit of information about some of the damned, the slaughter man. Take a moment to think about all the celebrities you know. How many of them do you reckon would do well in D's? Not many, I'll wager. Perhaps none. Fame and fortune on earth doesn't count for shit when you're dead. Very few people are strong enough, mean enough, and downright psychotic enough to earn a reputation in hell. Those few who have what it takes are people you never want to meet. The slaughter man is one of hell's legends, a huge bearded man with filed teeth, bloodshot eyes, and foam on his lips. Rumor has it that the day he first emerged from a birthing sack, he was unlucky enough to land at the feet of a slaver tribe. Well, those tribesmen chuckled to themselves and readied their clubs and whips, only too happy to take some fresh meat captive. Outnumbered 12 to 1, naked, unarmed, and brand new to hell, most people wouldn't stand a chance. If you believe the stories, the slaughterman shrugged off the clubs battering against him and the whips cutting into his flesh as though they were insect bites. He picked up the first slaver, put his hand into the man's mouth, and pulled his jaw right off his skull. He moved on to another, then another, tearing them apart with his bare hands, until the survivors turned and fled. Nobody knows for sure who he was in life. I've heard theories, though, the most popular one being that he was the berserker of Stamford Bridge. Supposedly, a single Viking held up the English army single-handed. It didn't matter that he could never win, that he was outnumbered, that his enemies had better weapons and armor. He stood on that bridge and he fought. By the time he was brought down, he'd killed no less than 40 men. I don't know how true any of this is. I've never seen the slaughter man for myself, and I don't fucking want to. What I can tell you for sure is that people don't become legendary in hell without good reason. I'd guess that the only one who knows the truth is the slaughter man himself, and he isn't saying anything. Since the day he arrived in hell, he's only spoken once. The fleeing slavers heard it as the slaughterman tore their tribe apart. Naked, bloody, and surrounded by corpses, the slaughterman looked up to the storm-racked sky and bellowed a single word. Valhalla! Hellhounds. How about a little story? I wasn't new to hell. I'd made myself some clothes and a wooden club, found shelter and had a big slab of meat roasting over a campfire. The only thing I didn't have was a tribe. The area I'd been birthed in seemed slummy even for Dis, all half-collapsed hovels and mud huts. Iron was scarce, barely enough to make myself a water bowl. All in all, not a good spot for a tribe. My plan was simple enough. I'd have a decent meal, carve myself a shiv or two in case I lost my club, then find somewhere more or less dry to sleep. After that, I'd set off to look for a tribe. Even the mildest tribal initiations result in a few scars and a broken nose, so I wanted to be as well rested as I could be. Sleep in hell is both vital and dangerous. There's a knack to finding somewhere that's simultaneously sheltered, hidden, and with access to an escape route. Even then, you never get more than a few hours at a time. In hell, the slightest suspicious noise should scare the shit out of you. A low, throaty growl definitely counts as a suspicious noise. I leapt out of my impromptu nest of skins and wood, raised my club, and returned the growl with one of my own. A woman had crept into my building and was staring at me with dilated pupils. She looked to be in a bad way, skinny, naked, and covered in weeping sores. Her lips peeled back to reveal broken and jagged teeth. It took me all of a second to size her up. She'd been living rough for days or weeks. Judging from her protruding ribs and bloated stomach, she was well on her way to dying of starvation. So she was weak, hungry, and didn't even have a weapon. I've already eaten, I said, relaxing a little and giving my club a few practice swings. No sense in letting you go to waste, though. I took a step towards her, and she bolted, just turned right around and scampered away in a strange, animal gait. I took off after her, certain that I could outpace her. Even if there wasn't much meat on her, bones can still be useful. I chased her through a few streets, struggling to keep my footing on the muddy ground. When I finally got close enough to swing my club, she stopped dead. The suddenness of it caught me off guard, and I tripped over her, losing my club as I fell. She howled in triumph, a sound that was echoed by a dozen other throats. That day, I learned two things about the hellhounds: the people who lose their minds and become little more than beasts after enduring centuries in hell. Firstly, they have the necessary animal cunning to hunt as a pack. Secondly, human teeth and fingernails are perfectly capable of ripping flesh from the bone. The surgeons. Modern doctors rarely thrive in hell. Academia and reliance on technology don't leave you in the best state to endure the endless violence and brutality. There are exceptions, though. The people who learn to sew their friends back together amid the machine gun fire of the Somme. Shamans, witch doctors, and holy men who endured famine and warfare. Survivalists who knew how to cauterize their own wounds in the middle of a forest. Those are some of the people who might just be strong enough to ply their trade to the damned. After all, working knowledge of basic medicine is just one of those things that's beyond a lot of the meatheads roaming Dis. Most of hell's surgeons find a tribe as soon as they're able. Their tools might be crude, but they soon learn to make do. Flint, slate, and shards of glass serve as their scalpels. They make thread from human hair and needles from slivers of iron. Whenever a member of the tribe has an infected sore, a surgeon will be the one to drain the pus. A tribal surgeon could well save your life, but they'll do it without anesthetic. Then there are the freelance surgeons, the people who try to go it alone. They make themselves a uniform, the theory being that the damned will recognize them if they all look alike. It doesn't really work. But then you can't expect much logic from people who've lost count of how many times they've died. For one thing, fashions change over time. I'm told that freelancers wore headdresses and bone necklaces at one point. The current trend is to mimic Venetian plague doctors by donning a beaked mask and wearing a long coat of fire-blackened skin. Freelancers are rare. Very rare, in fact. You'll see thousands of the damned for every freelance surgeon you come across. When you do come across one, be fucking careful. Firstly, surgeons don't get a free pass in hell. The damned are more likely to attack a freelancer than they are to barter their tools, clothes, or slaves in exchange for his services. You can't be certain if the man in the bird mask and black coat is really a surgeon or somebody who murdered a surgeon and took his clothes. Perhaps they made the outfit themselves in order to draw the weak and the wounded close. Advertising doesn't always work as intended in dis. If the freelancer turns out to be genuine, that doesn't give you an excuse to drop your guard. Freelance surgeons aren't usually the most stable people. Put another way, freelancers are usually sadistic fucking psychopaths. Sure, they might stitch you back together and send you on your way. They might also decide it would be more interesting if they stitched you to somebody else. They might think paying an arm and a leg for their service should be taken literally. They might turn out to be some wannabe serial killer who's yet to find their way to Skin Street. For each freelancer trying to do a tough job in a tougher place, there are a dozen or so Mengeles who want to try out their toys on somebody too injured to fight back. Stick with your tribe's surgeon if you're lucky enough to have one. Failing that, learn to patch up your own wounds. Trust me, if you're able to read, you've already got the intellectual advantage over a lot of hell's residents. Universal education is pretty recent. Freelancers aren't worth the risk. Cambions. I'll be honest with you here. I don't know if cambions actually exist. What I'm going to tell you is something that somebody else told me. It's up to you to decide if it's true or not. Personally, I really fucking hope it isn't. People rape one another in hell. It happens a lot. If you're not strong enough, it'll happen a lot to you. The good news for the ladies out there is that damned men fire blanks. You'll almost never be impregnated. I say almost never because, if you believe the stories, there's an incredibly slim chance that a couple of those little swimmers will be awake and looking for an egg. Just to put this in perspective, we're talking conjoined twins levels of unlikeliness here, and that's just conception. The chances of a pregnant woman surviving the full 9 months in hell are probably conjoined triplets levels of unlikely. You're talking about a perfect storm of beating the odds here, but this is eternity. A monkey randomly mashing keys on a typewriter will eventually produce the complete works of Shakespeare if it goes at it for eternity. The result of that perfect storm, of those monkeys with their typewriters, is a cambion, a child conceived and born in hell. I'm not saying they exist, okay? I'm saying I've met somebody who swears it's true, and that he's seen a cambion for himself. You see babies in their birthing sacks from time to time. Usually it's just a body. Occasionally you see one drowning. Most of the damned ignore them. They wouldn't survive a day on the streets, even if you could afford to devote your full attention to them. Better to leave them be. It's only the really fucked up people who cut through the sacks and... Yeah, I'm not going to finish that thought. I'm getting sidetracked. So, this cambion who may or may not have existed apparently looked like a normal child. It cried, it shit, and it sucked its mother's tits just like a regular baby would. The mother was part of a tribe, and they'd been able to protect her throughout her pregnancy. Couldn't tell you why. Curiosity, perhaps. When it was born, the whole tribe gathered around to have a look. Among them was the man who told me this story, somebody I'd meet years later and eventually kill. This man cut the baby's cord and lifted it up to his face. Every man in the tribe had raped the mother at one point or another, and he wanted to see if the child looked anything like him. The cambion looked like a normal child in every way but one. Its eyes were dead, lifeless, like a doll's. Sure, the kid was alive. It wriggled and cried like a normal baby. Those eyes were wide open, though, not scrunched closed like a newborn's eyes should be. Wide open, empty, doll's eyes. If that story is true, I don't blame the tribe for killing the child. Something like that shouldn't exist. Right, I'm done. I have to go. This is the point where people like to have things nicely tied up. A few dragons slain, a few maidens saved. At the very least, you could expect some kind of moral lesson to think over. I think that, in this case, that sort of thing is missing the point. There are no dragons to slay, no morals to learn. We do not live happily ever after. There's no grand revelation, no clever twist, no purpose, no redemption, no hope. There's only eternity among our own kind. Hello. It's been a long time. The last body I had in the living world didn't cope too well with my mind driving it. It's sometimes hard to remember that the lessons you learn in hell aren't a good fit for the civilized world. When murder is just a normal part of existence, you tend to keep doing it out of habit. The inevitable result is either death or exorcism and a trip back to the city of Dis. Safe to say, I got a bit carried away the last time I was here. After my last taste of freedom, I knew that I had to get back out of Dis. My existence ever since I squandered my last host has been utterly dedicated to fighting my way back into a pillar of fire. I had to escape Dis. After what I've seen, I had to escape. This new body seems a little more durable than the last one. Now that I'm back, shall we take another trip into hell? Phlegethon Swamp. It rains in hell. It rains all the fucking time, and that water has to go somewhere. Most of it drains out into Gehenna, where it sinks into the otherworldly ash and apparently disappears. The rest flows either into the sewers beneath the city, or it collects in Phlegethon Swamp. Remember how it's a bad idea to drink the rainwater in hell without boiling it? Well, Phlegethon's water will kill you no matter what you do with it. Even letting the stuff touch your skin can be deadly. You see, the swamp isn't just filled with disease and rot. It's also brimming with chemical waste. One pool might simply be undrinkable, but another might dissolve your flesh. If you're mad enough to travel to Phlegethon, or unlucky enough to be born there, your odds of survival are slim. Phlegethon's waters are inky black, and it's impossible to tell just how deep a pool is by looking. It could be an inch, or it could be a mile. You never know whether or not your next footfall will plunge you into the cloying abyss. Worse still, there are places where the sewers gradually drain the water and create unseen vortices capable of dragging down even the strongest of the damned. To navigate the swamp, you're better off using the crumbled buildings as stepping stones. The corrosive water causes wooden supports to wither and collapse, so there's plenty of debris lying around to stand on. Even so, if you don't take it slow and keep your balance, it's easy to slip and subject yourself to a fucking agonizing death. Last but not least are the wildfires. These are the reason that even the most insane tribes don't try to establish a permanent stronghold in Phlegethon Swamp. All that chemical waste and decaying matter makes the swamp extremely volatile. A lightning strike or buildup of gases can result in immense explosions that ignite Phlegethon's surface for miles around. Wildfires move fast. I guarantee you that you won't outrun one. Cositus. The first time you see Cositus, you could be forgiven for thinking you'd reach the very edge of Dis. The pit is dozens of miles wide and several times as deep. At some point in the dim and distant past, a fragile alliance of tribes put their slaves to work, digging a quarry. Why they did this is lost to time, but many believe it was an attempt to escape Dis. Perhaps those tribes hoped that if they dug far enough, they'd eventually tunnel their way out of hell. In my view, the more likely answer is that the tribes were looking for resources. If that's true, then the excavation was a success. Miles below the surface, beneath the rock and dirt, there are caverns filled with veins of iron and copper. So far underground and sheltered from the relentless fucking rain, it's far easier to create a fire hot enough to smelt ore. The value of such a position wasn't lost on the tribes, and that alliance soon showed just how brittle it was. After a short but savage burst of treachery, the initial settlers of Cocytus all but wiped themselves out. Since then, the pit has been settled and mined countless times. Coordinated efforts from various tribes have transformed the quarry into an abyss. So far, these alliances have always been broken sooner or later. Cocytus has many paths into its depths, and the lower you go, the more labyrinthine the pit becomes. The sprawling caverns shelter entire shanty towns and crude smelting facilities. Some are abandoned, others have been lost to cave-ins. Yet there are still plenty of tribes who fight, join forces, and betray one another over the precious ore veins. By this point, you have to go pretty fucking deep to find an untapped vein. And this is where Cocytus becomes truly deadly. Anybody who thought they might be able to tunnel out of hell would be sorely disappointed once they learn what lies in the depths. In all these years, after digging for so many miles, not one person has run into some magical portal leading out of Dis. They also haven't run into magma for that matter. Instead, the deeper you go, the colder Cocytus becomes. I've never been to the very bottom myself. I'm told that down there, the air is cold enough to freeze your blood and shatter your skin. Maybe that's true. I could certainly believe it. On the rare occasions I've been to Cocytus, I've always had to turn back once the walls became more ice than rock, and the narrow walkways became a death trap. If you have the numbers to do it, Cocytus is still a valuable place to settle. Just remember that when hunger, cold, and greed are your constant companions, none of the damned can be trusted. The Pale Witch. I've told you about the Slaughterman previously, but hell has other legendary figures, each with their own sobriquets: the Ripper, the Grim Doctor, the Tyrant, and many more. So far, I've only encountered one of these figures. During my last stay in hell, I came across the Pale Witch. As is always the case with legends, the truth about the Pale Witch tends to get lost amid the superstition. I've heard plenty of theories as to what she is. The Pale Witch is a Striga who has the power of the evil eye. The Pale Witch is a Gorgon whose gaze turns her victims to stone. The Pale Witch is a succubus who entraps the minds of those she wishes to consume. All of that is bullshit. I've seen the Pale Witch and I know the truth about her. When I first saw her, I didn't realize who I was looking at. She was naked and locked in combat with an armed resident, so I just took her for fresh meat. Here's a tip for you. If you see a resident fighting fresh meat, kill both of them while they're distracted. I planned to do exactly that, but something about the fight seemed off. Residents usually have the upper hand in a fight against fresh meat, and this particular bout definitely seemed about as one-sided as it gets. She was naked, whereas he was clad in leather and bone. She was unarmed, whereas he had a club. She was waifish, whereas he was huge. Despite him having the advantage, the resident was clearly terrified of her. The rules of hell dictated that he should have cracked her skull, taken her skin, and eaten her flesh, but that just wasn't happening. He was uncoordinated and apparently desperate to escape. Every swing he took was clumsy, and the blows he did manage to land on her didn't seem to have any effect. I could only stare as this naked, vulnerable woman took the resident's club from his unresisting hand and swung it at his knee. I'm accustomed to the sound of bones breaking by now, but this time the noise caught me off guard. How the fuck was this happening? She brought the club down on his other knee, then his elbows, then his ankles, then his shoulders. She left him broken and screaming on the floor. She could have finished him off with a blow to the head, stolen his clothing, and taken her rightful place as a resident. That's how hell works. Those are the rules I've learned through bloody trial and error. That isn't what happened. Rather than kill him, she sat down beside him in the mud and took his hand in hers. I actually thought she was going to console him, until she started breaking his fingers. One by one, she snapped the fingers on both his hands, with a calmness that made no sense to me. Torture is common in hell, but there's always a purpose behind it. The people in Skin Street do it out of sadism, and the people in the boneyard do it for their insane purification rituals. This woman did it without emotion and without reason. I honestly don't know if she even understood that she was hurting him. I don't think her mind works the same way as ours. Eventually, the resident lost consciousness. A man can only take so much pain before the shock gets him. Surely now she'd be satisfied. Surely she'd take his clothes and restore hell's order. Number, she stood up, tilted her head slightly, and uttered a noise for the first time. It wasn't a victory cry, nor was it even a sigh of relief. Instead, the sound she made was nothing more than a faintly bemused It was as if she couldn't comprehend why her plaything had stopped moving. She stood up and stepped away from him, apparently content to leave him alive, unconscious and crippled on the ground. She kept his club, but didn't take his clothing. The cold and rain didn't seem to bother her. Then she looked at me. In that instant, I knew I was looking at the pale witch. I looked into her eyes and I couldn't fucking move. I understood what she was straight away, and the sheer terror of it froze me. The pale witch isn't a striga, she isn't a gorgon, and she isn't a succubus. The pale witch is a cambion. It's hard to put into words exactly how paralyzing the sight of a cambion is. That perfectly serene face and those dead, staring eyes just don't belong on a body that's otherwise human. It was like looking into the face of a mannequin and knowing that it's looking back at you. That noise again. That kind of detached curiosity shouldn't exist in the world of predator and prey. Might makes right, survival of the fittest. Nobody in the city of Dis has any right to make that noise. She took an awkward step towards me, and I saw that her right leg was broken. It seemed that her fight with the resident had injured her after all. She just didn't notice it. She tried to walk normally, completely unaware that one of her legs had an extra joint. I don't care how tough you are. Nobody should be able to put their full weight onto a broken leg without even wincing. She stepped closer, her zombie shuffle steadily closing the gap between us as I stared at her. She raised her club and my survival instincts finally kicked into gear. Her transfixing spell broke just enough for me to stumble backwards and avoid her swing. I ran. I ran from a woman with a broken leg, and I'm not even ashamed of it. Looking back on my experience, there are some things I just can't comprehend. The pale witch is a cambion, I'm certain of it. She was born in hell, and hell is all she's ever known. She also looked to be about 30 years old. That just shouldn't be possible. No baby survives long in Dis. Even if they had a tribe to protect them, there just isn't enough nourishment for an infant to grow into a toddler, let alone an adult. The pale witch is a walking impossibility. Her existence is a defiance of all reason. I would endure every torture the people of Skin Street and the Boneyard could conceive of if it meant I would never have to look into her eyes again.